State of Identity Fraud Report webinar. We're really excited to have you join us today. We've got a couple of great experts that can talk through insights to actions, key data, trends, and innovations that'll shape 2025. So we'll get some intros and housekeeping items out of the way. If you're unfamiliar with AuthenticID, we're an identity verification and fraud prevention provider, and we help businesses verify that people are who they say they are, which is increasingly difficult, as we'll go over in more detail today. Our first expert, Blair Cohen, the founder and president of AuthenticID, and we also have Eva Velasquez, the CEO of the Identity Theft Resource Center. So Blair, Eva, I don't know if you just want to take a moment to introduce yourselves before we get started.
Well, I'll just thank you, Sarah, for putting together this remarkable report. I'll tell you that I've reviewed the draft and there's some amazing findings in here. Great work getting all the insights from customers and other people in the industry. Great stats. Thank you so much for having me here today.
Yeah, and I will extend that thank you as well. You know, Blair, you're on the ITRC board, and AuthenticID has been a great partner in this fight against identity crime. So I'm really appreciative to be here and share my perspective.
Great. Well, as I mentioned, some housekeeping. We'll tackle the main topics of the report, from tactics to prevention strategies, and we'll have Q&A at the end as well. So if you have any questions, please enter those in the chat, and if time allows, we'll get to those at the end of the presentation. In addition, after the webinar is over, we'll send out a recording, and then please be out on the lookout for a final copy of the 2025 State of Identity Fraud Report. So we're going to kick it off just by talking about the fraud that has changed the game and the fraud that will change it again. And first, we're just going to look at fraud year over year and some of those big trends that we're seeing. So I'd like to do our first poll. If you would head to that section of your screen, and you can only pick one. Sorry, you can't pick two. You may be facing a lot of types of fraud, but we're looking at what kind of fraud is on the rise, has kind of been the biggest rise at your organization. So if you can just click that, and we'll take a look at that in a bit, but then we'll kick it off with our panelists. So Blair, I want to start with you. We're looking at this upward trajectory of fraudulent transactions year over year, and you know, what have you observed in the past year, particularly as it relates to identity fraud, you know, in terms of where we're at now?
Gosh, Sarah, I was scared back in 2022 with the evolution and the sophistication of the and the vulnerabilities and the attacks that these fraudsters were making against us. But to see it go from almost double from 2022 to 2024, 1.27 going from memory to 2.10. So 2.1% of every darn transaction that we see is now turned out to be fraudulent. I didn't expect it to go that way. I thought we'd see a downward trend with all the emphasis and all the tools that were being put to work and the quality of the tools that were being put to work by businesses and, you know, all around the world. I expected to see a decline. So to see it double is annoying. We've gotten a lot better at what we do at fighting fraud, but to see that, you know, now and this is just Authentic ID's perspective, encountering 5,400 fake IDs alone or spoof attempts every single day, over 2 million throughout the course of the year. I'm astounded, quite honestly. So
And
I'll
Eva,
leave it at that.
yes, Eva, I'm sure you've seen some similar, you know, figures and trends in terms of what you've observed as well.
Yeah, I'm with you, Blair, in that I'm astounded but not astounded, because we talk to people every day. So you're looking at all of those transactions and we're talking to the people that it's impacting. But I think where you know, every year I've been in this space for a long time, decades. And every year I think the impacts can't keep just getting worse, and they do. The impact on an individual that's on the other end of that fraudulent transaction is getting more and more severe from a financial perspective. They're losing more and more money and higher dollar amounts. And from just a life and reaching their goals, moving forward in their life. It's just getting harder and harder, particularly for victims, to prove they are who they say they are. And so the fraud is just getting more and more intractable, and it's really impacting each individual in more severe ways. So that, I just didn't think it could get this much worse, to be honest.
I'm with you. I didn't either. So disappointed, honestly, to see that number.
Yeah.
Well, to add to the good news, which all sarcasm intended, one tactic that we talk about quite a bit in the report is deep fakes. I think last year in, this very same webinar, we talked about the impact of generative AI and deep fake technology. And it's really continuing to make these threats not just a growing concern, but I think a pressing concern. And I want to draw attention to the slide here, which has, obviously the surge in identity fraud tactics that we've seen on Authentic ID, but also an interesting number about the gap between business owners' confidence in their ability to detect this threat versus the actual employees who are confident in those threats. And Blair, you see that gap and also this growth. What's driving both the growth and that gap in confidence?
Let me answer the growth piece first, and kind of point you here to the video deepfake stat. That's astounding. Going, 20 points more from one year to another, 29 to 49% in just 1 year. And what I would attribute that to is the tools. The prevalence of these absolutely amazing. And we've seen deepfake tools that have been available out there for a long time. Some of them aren't even deepfakes. They're things like made by Oracle, Adobe, and for real visual and graphic editors. But some of these tools that have made it so easy where you don't need to be a Photoshop expert, you can simply chat to an engine and have it do what you want it to do. Photoshop's hard, but chatting to an engine is very, very simple. So I would attribute the prevalence and the ease and simplicity of the tools to the growth. Now, the gap between the perceptions on our ability to stop and detect this is a little bit shocking. I guess I haven't dug into this enough, Sarah, but my guess is that the business owner themselves feel like they've spent an awful lot of money. They're hearing about this deepfake problem and how it's going to impact them. So I bet they've invested a bunch of money into fighting these attacks and those vulnerabilities. And based on what the salesperson told them they were investing in, they feel like 76% feel like they can actually stop this stuff. But the business manager who's working in the business every day and seeing the actual attacks and seeing the actual vulnerabilities seems to have dramatically less confidence. Still, I believe both are way overconfident. I don't think that the business managers nor the business owners have any real ability unless they've invested in very strong, robust tools like those offered by Authentic ID and some of the other people in our space. But those are typically reserved for the big banks and governments and big telcos. So a small business owner, how they can feel confident that they're not vulnerable and can stop these things, you're drinking too much. You've got the bad illusion here because you can't. I'm an expert at this. I can't stop this stuff visually. So that's what I'd attribute it to. Eva, you've got a real different perspective. I'm curious to hear yours.
Well, actually, I think this is where business owners, and I'll address that first, the gap. This is where I think business owners and individual consumers kind of converge. It's this notion that it can't happen to me. So I know these things are out there. I know deep fakes exist. I've been hearing in the news that they are a problem. To your point, I have looked at my budget, and as a business owner, I've invested a lot of money in this issue and addressing this challenge. So therefore, it's not going to happen to me. And I think there's a psychological mindset here that we need to break through. Yeah, we're all vulnerable. Everyone is vulnerable to these types of scams and fraud, deepfakes in particular, and that includes business owners, even business owners that have made a significant investment in trying to address the issue. And I would also say, you talked about the ease of the use and the availability of all these tools, but they're cheap. They're cheap
Oh,
now, so they're so inexpensive. The ROI for all of the scammers is, I mean, it's a no-brainer for them. So I think that is also a big contributing factor. Whereas they used to be maybe your lower level scammer who wants to give this a try. It used to be out of their price range. Not anymore.
yeah, not even close. I mean, they're giving you unlimited use for
It's a BOGO. Like,
$250 a month,
we'll give you the
with
software
free
if you
tech
buy some
support.
polls. Yeah.
Yeah, they literally have free support. I mean, that phishing attack didn't work. Let me guide you here. And you can call somebody and they'll guide you how to make it better.
Yeah.
It's for $250 a month. Yeah, nice ROI. I agree.
And Eva, to add to that, to add insult to injury, as I'm sure you're an expert here, is that they can pair this with what they're getting from data breaches. In the past couple of years, we've seen such high profile breaches, and can you talk about that a little bit in terms of having these tools at their disposal and this information? What does that mean for organizations in terms of detecting and fighting fraud?
Well, that it's going to continue to be an uphill battle. When you look at just the availability of deep fakes and being able to use this technology along with all of the data, when you combine those two things, you've just supersized the problem, because now you have all of these different vectors that you have to watch out for. And that's for businesses. But again, I'm always going to bring this back to how it impacts consumers as well, because we're all in this fight together. And I do feel like consumers are going through the same thing. They see an image that isn't real. They hear a voice, because we've also got the voice cloning. They, on top of that, then this caller, this person, whoever they're interacting with, is also talking to them and has a lot of their information. Oh, I know your name. I know your date of birth. I know your address. I know the last four of your account number. All information that was your email address. All this information that has been, believe me, swept up in all of the record number of breaches that we've had over the last couple of years. But it gives this air of legitimacy. That is going to be monumentally difficult for businesses to address, but also for consumers. This is a problem that is going to be impacting everyone, all parties that are involved.
Yeah, I mean, you consider you're applying real world data. I mean, the breaches Eva is talking about here, this is of real people. So the data that's being stolen is all real data. You combine that with fraud as a service that'll make you a perfect ID from the state that data, from where that person resides in. And they probably have answers to not only your address, date of birth, social security, and last four of your account number, but also more obscure things like
Oh
what
yeah,
was the amount of your mortgage payment last month? What was your car's? What was the name of your car? What make and model was that? What's your cat's name?
yeah.
Things like
Where do
that
you
that are
eat?
typically out of
What are
wallet
your
questions.
favorite retailers? All of that.
Yeah, they have all of that, and that all gets leaked in a breach. So, my gosh, you combine that with a fake ID, and today's fake IDs are very realistic. What do you do? How do you battle that? How do you fight that as a consumer or even a small business?
Yeah.
In addition to, deep fakes, which is one tactic that we really highlighted that's been on the rise and we expect to really continue in 2025 is workforce fraud, really
Oh.
starting to target both businesses and individuals, employees and employers. And Blair, from the business angle, what are businesses seeing in terms of things like, fake employees? Are these better fakes, and their ability to detect those?
So this is probably the scariest part of all of the fraud that we see. So when a regular fraud and account takeover happens, somebody takes over my account, they get my credentials, and they log in and drain my bank account. Yeah, I'm devastated, but the loss is money, right? And some of that I'm probably going to get back. I didn't lose my life. The next most concerning part of fraud that concerned me was healthcare fraud, because when medical records start to get mixed, you can see a loss of life. But now with workforce fraud, I'm not saying it's worse than loss of life. That's obviously the biggest tragedy. But what these people are gaming for is privileged access management roles. So they want to get a job in the privilege where the high tech, high security system is within a data center for MGM, for Amazon, for companies like AuthenticID. We have been attacked by people that are legitimately in North Carolina, but they're spoofing IDs. They've taken data, as Eva knows, from somebody that really lives in Illinois, and they've got all that person in Illinois's name, address, date of birth, social. They'll actually have the work, and then when you send them the test, they're passing these tests like crazy. I mean, you're seeing scores way above what you would ever expect. You can't wait to hire this person after the testing. So you send them their workstations and all that kind of thing to the Illinois address, but it never gets lit up there. It gets lit up in North Korea. We can see that happening. And that's scary because now this is a person that has privileged access management. They have the keys to the kingdom in the back. They can recreate new credentials. They can destroy old credentials. They can install malware, ransomware. They can really do whatever they want. So the workforce fraud, it manifests in a variety of different ways. I'm probably describing the scariest of all in a lot of different ways. Ava, what are you seeing in terms of workforce fraud?
Well, on the consumer side, it's job scams, and it's a tremendous growth in job scams. We saw 118% increase in reports to our call center year over year. So people are responding to either fake recruiters reaching into them, whether it's by text or by email. They're responding to fake postings on legitimate sites. And for them, and I think, as all things with fraud, there's the whole cycle. They are then giving all of their personal information over to this bad actor who can then potentially not only commit fraud against them, but can use their data to do exactly what you're talking about, Blair, and go after other people, stealing their identity, applying for other jobs, using that information. I mean, there's just so many ways that they can leverage that information. And it's a rich data set because when people think they're getting the job, oh, yes, you can have everything. I'm excited. You can have everything you're asking me for. And they give logins and passwords. And I think the trigger that we're seeing for a lot of people is they'll give away the static data, they'll give away documents, but when they start getting asked for logins for personal accounts, like what's your ID Me account? What's your My SSA account? And they go, wait a minute, why does my employer need to know that? But in the meantime, they've provided all of this other information, and it's not slowing down because it's so confusing out there right now. Individuals don't understand the tectonic changes we've had in how we recruit and hire people, especially if they're new to the workforce or they've been away from it for a while. So I don't see this slowing down anytime soon. I really think we're going to continue to see this on the rise.
Gosh, so we're seeing it from both sides of the coin then, Eva. We're seeing fake employers out here that are advertising completely bogus jobs,
Yep.
and then fake people that are applying
Fake
applying for
people
real
using
jobs
real
typically.
identities.
Yes, using real identities, exactly, and coming across very realistically. What's the answer there from the consumers that are penetrating these real businesses? What do we do?
Well, this is where education comes in and really getting people to step back with their excitement and understanding what the red flags are before they give away all of that data. So we've just been doing a lot of telling would-be job seekers to verify, verify, verify. If you didn't initiate the communication, if it's incoming to you and you didn't initiate it, go to the source and verify that that's legitimate. If you see it on a legitimate website that, there's no other way to say it. You just can't trust it. You just can't say, well, because it's on LinkedIn or Indeed, therefore it's gone through a vetting process. And frankly, people think that. They think, well, I didn't find it on Facebook Marketplace, or I didn't find it on, Craigslist or something else. It was on LinkedIn. It was on Indeed. Well, that does not automatically make that a legitimate posting. You still have to do your homework. So the answer for us, unfortunately, it's a lot of burden on the job seeker, but there's no other way around it right now.
And I suppose when they start asking all these for you, all the sensitive information, that's a bit of a red flag as well.
Especially for the interview. That's another thing that people just don't quite understand is that, yes, when you are hired, then you do have to provide this information to your employer, but not during the interview process. They only need your contact information, your name, and your skills. That's it. They don't need all that other information until you have secured the job. And that's also helping people to recognize it when they're like, oh, I shouldn't be giving all that away on an application. Yeah, correct. I would walk away from that opportunity.
Sounds wise.
So in addition to talking about the fraud that has really grown, it's really also become about the fraudsters, right? They're getting better at the things they do. They have more technology and they continue to change and evolve. So I wanted to talk with you both about, how they're evolving, what we're seeing in the tools we're using. We mentioned them a bit earlier. Whether they're working alone or whether working with a group, there's more technology than ever to make them effective, unfortunately. And Blair, you mentioned earlier, fraud as a service, the AI and automation and tools they have available. And now they're really able to target businesses and identities with ease.
Yeah, I think it's going to compound the difficulty in combating all of this stuff. In the past, what we've seen, not exclusively, but a lot of the attacks that we saw were organized crime. Organized crime were the people that had access to people that work 24/7, that had access to these sophisticated tools, had the developers that could create these sophisticated phishing attacks, that kind of thing. But now, as these tools have become available to anybody that can just talk, just chat to an engine, you don't have to have any development skills. You've lowered the burden, and it's going to move from organized crime to people that are sitting in their basements, which is kind of where it used to start. It used to be people, these little one-off folks sitting in their basement committing these crimes that you never knew of. Then it evolved to organized, and now I think we're going to see a combination of organized and the guys sitting in their basement. It's going to get broader, is my thinking.
And in addition, one tactic that we haven't mentioned just yet, but something, Eva, that I'm sure you can talk about quite a bit is, social engineering. When we're talking about AI technology, the data people have, the ability to commit those social engineering scams is also easier, in addition to using things like phishing as a service and fraud as a service. So, what have you seen there and the trends that we can expect in 2025?
Well, everything that Blair said, I completely agree with. I do think it's going to continue to balloon. And with the social engineering as a service, I mean, essentially, the bar to entry is low. You can purchase all of these things. It's DIY scammer. You can just purchase all of the tools that you need. But they also have platforms with coaching on how to better frame your social engineering. How do you create a better hook? It's just all out there teaching. It's like Home Depot for the fraudsters. And I think the other factor that you didn't mention, Blair, is the appeal. We're seeing more and more that there's a cool factor to perpetrating these types of frauds and crimes, particularly with young people. And we're seeing more and more domestically. I mean, yes, all of these nation state fraud rings, they all exist. They're all a huge problem. But we are also seeing young people in this country thinking this is a great way not only to make money, but to be really cool. And we're seeing it increasingly. It's not just on the dark web and in the identity marketplaces. It's on the public web. It's on YouTube. They have public
So,
YouTube channels saying, look at these cool things that I did. Here's how to do it. Like and subscribe. I mean, it is pervasive.
and we're seeing it on Facebook. I mean, every social media platform out there. And you're
Mhm.
right, they're making it cool. Used to be a criminal was a bad guy. They hid underground. You never told anybody about your crime. Now they've gotten brazen in trying
Oh,
to recruit all of these young folks. You'll see stacks of cash, piles of Gucci and Louis Vuitton bags, new cars, jewelry out the yin yang, and they'll all they're doing is
use
telling
the
people how
apartment.
easy it is.
Yeah.
For $100, we can equip you with this. You're going to be rich by tomorrow night.
And
So,
I hate to say it, but fighting against the cool factor with young people, that is an entirely different challenge. And we have to develop different tools to fight that one. So I'm concerned about that piece of it.
why do you think I don't want to interrupt Sarah? But I do have a question about this. This one confused me. So we're seeing where the countries are coming from and where we're seeing the top countries for cybercrime ring growth. They're all in Asia. Why is that? Is it cool to be rich in Asia? I thought that was a US thing.
I think it's cool to have your financial needs met anywhere. Um, and
Sure.
I don't know really the cool factor piece that I'm talking about is actually really domestic. It's here in the US.
Okay.
And the reason I brought it up is because we have had a lot of focus on the foreign countries, rightly so. I am not disputing that. But at the same time, I do want us to be paying attention to these trends that we're seeing domestically and acknowledge that they are a growing problem. It's sort of like, hey, let's not forget that there's this entire the ecosystem with this issue. It's not just foreign bad actors. We've got them right here in the U.S. and they have different motivations and different skills and practices. And I think we need to look at this holistically and continue to address them at the same time.
Agree.
Yes, how to create a fraudster. It seems that no skills necessary, right? There's
Right?
None.
Just a phone, so you can take images of all the cool stuff you're doing. Yep.
The only deterrent out there, I think, that still exists, and I think we'll see that in some of the data, is fraudsters are more than happy to submit a fake identity document, but we do start to see a drop off when they have to take a picture of the real face. Happy to submit a synthetic face or, somebody's face other than theirs, but when you get to the point where you leave them no other choice, but they have to take a picture of the real face, that's the one thing they're still a little bit concerned about. So,
showing that.
anyways,
Yes.
go on.
Yeah, and that's a good lead into the next, tactic and topic, which is fake IDs. We've come a long way from, the days of, cutting and pasting paper to even where these IDs were a few years ago. Blair, I know we've talked at other times about how cheap they are to make and how easy they are to make. And the states are also in the U.S. working hard to fight this battle. So how are fraudsters spoofing IDs now? And why are they now so difficult for a lot of traditional methods to detect?
So traditionally, I've been doing this for a long time. I know about there's like 40 or 50 different types of security features that can be used on identity documents, and all have the ability to be replicated for the most part, particularly if you're just doing a visual examination. If you're going to conduct a visual examination using forensic tools, it does become more challenging. But historically, and I've been doing this for about 12 years, you did a bunch of visual analysis. So we looked at this North Carolina ID and looked at the patterns, looked at the headshots, looked at the security features. So you look for the security features that should be evident on the document. We want to validate to make sure that they get, did I just go sideways?
Things have gone sideways, Blair.
Right.
Yes, that's
It's a
Um,
metaphor for the world of fraud. Well done, Blair.
I just pressed something and I shouldn't have, and I knew it. I'll try to resolve that in just a moment. So anyway, historically, we've looked to validate that things like security features that should exist do exist on this document that's being presented, that we get the right color response from that security feature, and that's precisely placed on the document. So you do all these visual examinations of an identity document to make sure that it looks like a real North Carolina ID. Are the security features and patterns and headshots where we expect them to be? Unfortunately, you've got Photoshop and you've got a million different websites out there that are selling these fake IDs, and they've taken a real genuine ID and photoshopped it and imaged it in high resolution and made that template available. So now the templates that you're buying out on the World Wide Web or the dark web, whatever it may be, it's a perfect template. So if you're only looking at visual features on an identity document, it's very likely that you're going to get beat. This particular one, I like what they've done. So we've seen this ghost image. The ghost image is, so we've got the regular headshot image on the left-hand side of the document. You see a smaller version of that on the right-hand side of the document. In the past, that was a see-through thing, so you could kind of see the back of the head on the New York document, but now we're actually seeing the face on the back of the document. That really, it doesn't sound like much, but when you think about the sophistication and how to manufacture and produce an identity document, that one little feature alone adds a lot of difficulty to creating a fake ID. It's the first one I've seen where they've gone that far. The New York has the see-through ghost image, and I've seen it from another state as well. That is actually beatable. The other thing that we've seen are things like laser imaging. So on the California ID up in the upper right-hand corner, you'll see a little golden bear. Well, if you look really, really, really closely in that golden bear, they use laser perforations that occur on a set interval all the way around that bear. And those laser perforations literally go all the way through the identity document. Fraudsters don't have those lasers to be able to do that perfectly. So they tend to do it more manually and do it with things like pens. So they'll try to get that perfect interval and poke a pen through the middle of that plastic document, but they don't get those intervals just right, and the dimensions of that hole, they don't get just right. So it's gotten a lot more challenging. You can see some of the things that we do. One of the things that we're seeing a lot of today is headshot modifications. So they'll steal a real identity document, but again, they don't want to put their face on the identity document. So they'll either create a synthetic face, use somebody else's face, and put that onto the identity document. Maybe they'll use a version of their face so that they can pass that selfie to headshot matching validation that some people perform. We look at some of the fonts. Most people don't know, but the fonts that exist on these identity documents, those are not available in Word. They're not available in Google Docs. Those are unique fonts that are used by these government entities. So we can look for irregularities there. I think one of the most powerful things is looking at the data and the text that exist on these documents. Those are more deterministic. If I see something, and I won't go into all the different examples, we don't want to tip off too many of the fraudsters, but for example, the Georgia ID is valid for 5 years. We will see issue dates on identity documents that precede when that Georgia ID was actually issued to the public. We will see expiration dates on those documents that don't logically make sense. It may be a 4-year expiration or a 6-year expiration from when it was issued, but we know that the rule should be 5. There's a ton of stuff there, things like the document numbers that are on an identity document. That's not a random sequence of numbers. There is an algorithm that's used to create that identity document number. There's a ton of data available in this barcode, and the way that the data is placed and spaced and presented within that barcode is very specific. So we see tons of errors there. And these are deterministic. So when we see some data that doesn't jive with the codex from that issuing authority, There's no question about it. That's going to be a fake document. One of the other things that we're seeing a ton of, I've mentioned these websites where you can go and download the perfect template for virtually any identity document you can imagine. Um, but what do you do with that? So I've got this perfect identity document, but it's on my computer. If I take a picture of it from my computer screen, we're going to detect that. If I print it out to paper and laminate it, we're going to detect that. We actually do material analysis. So we know whether it should be a polycarbonate or Teflon document. And due to spectral reflection and a lot of advanced technologies, we're able to do an analysis of the material that that document is presented upon. So we catch a ton of those digitally created identity documents that way. The visual feature analysis, again, used to be the most important thing that we did, but that was 14 years ago. Today it's evolved. It's much less important. So I will stop there.
And Eva, I know we've chatted a bit about, the specific headshot swap with IDs that you see a lot now. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yes, and I'm so glad you didn't ask me to go into all of the nitty-gritty details like Blair did, because I could never even follow that. What we're seeing is we hear from folks that contact us because they have become aware that someone else has a driver's license in their name, and it's creating significant problems for them. Blair, earlier you talked about how with medical identity theft, loss of life, it's hard to think of something that's worse than that. And I agree with you, but we're seeing a lot of folks that these IDs are being used during the commission of a crime. So people are now dealing with criminal identity theft. Now, that's a small percentage overall of all of the identity theft that is occurring and all of the identity fraud that is occurring, but it is one of the hardest to resolve. And it puts the burden squarely on that individual, on the victim. And these IDs are good enough that they are passing muster with law enforcement personnel when they are stopping people. And it can be anything from just a moving violation to felonies, where people are not passing background checks for jobs or security clearances because they're being told, well, you're incarcerated in another state. People are serving prison sentences in their name. So while I can't really comment on the technicalities of the spoofed driver's licenses, I can say that we're hearing from people who are being impacted by this. The spoofs and the fakes are good enough that they're passing muster with law enforcement, and the consequences to those individuals are significant. We're talking about loss of opportunities, sometimes loss of freedom, because they are arrested. When they present their legitimate ID with their photograph, they're arrested and they lose their freedom. So it's a huge deal.
I'm no longer sideways, by the way.
We're glad to see it. Glad to hear it. Yeah. Continuing talking about, the bad actors and the differences in tactics and where you also want to talk about when and where they attack. We see here just the fraud rates by industry. Obviously fraudsters are targeting, all industries. We're seeing, all channels being targeted. And, for both of you, what are some challenges you've, witnessed or seen for particular channels, for particular, industries, even, in these shifts from 2024 to 2025 in terms of identity fraud?
I always go first, so we're going to switch things up. Eva, you go first this time.
Well, we're not behind the scenes. We're talking with the consumers and the actual victims. And I can tell you that it's social, it's online, and it's social media, and it's connection. It's any type of platform where they're connecting with individuals. That's where we're seeing so much of the fraud and the misuse occurring. And I'm not just talking about romance or relationship scams. Of course, that's happening, but it really runs the gamut with social media account takeover. and the lack of resolution for that, people don't actually know who they're talking to. So they think they're talking to Uncle Joe. They think they're talking to someone who's their nephew who's doing a fundraiser for his baseball team. And so they're sharing all of this information. They're giving up their money. For us, social media is just the biggest problem that we're seeing with the victims that are calling us. And unfortunately, we really don't have a lot of resources or solutions. There's such a closed system. There is no way to help these victims other than keep directing them back to the platform itself. And there's a lot of secondary fraud occurring because people think, I've got to talk to somebody, I've got to talk to somebody. They then Google the number or search for a customer service number, which doesn't exist, but there are a proliferation of them on the website. They call that number and they're victimized again because they give up a lot of personal information, they pay a fee, and it is a cycle. So for us, that's where we're seeing really the biggest problem.
And Blair, in terms of industries, from the business perspective, we have, our data here, which comes from, our customers, which may be, a bit different than kind of what we see nationally. But, clearly industries like gaming and employee background screening, which isn't surprising given what we've talked about at Workforce, are really seeing those increases in their fraud rates as well.
Yeah, and AuthenticID works primarily with enterprises. So we're mostly the bottom three on this category. The wireless, the financial services, and government entities, that's 95% of all of our business. We don't do that much gaming. But I did have a 20-year stint owning a background screening company, and I will tell you this number is low. 100% guarantee you that number is low. People lie about their salaries, people lie about their educational degrees, they lie about their GPAs, they all lie about whether or not they've had a criminal record or not. They all lie about their driving histories. It's a much higher number in the employment background screening area. I'm going to say 40% of the data that's on an application is maybe not totally bogus, but at least exaggerated to a pretty large extent. And I think so. These are the industries that we're seeing it in. I want to drill down a little bit more into channel because I find this interesting as well. When we first started, most of our deployments were brick and mortar. They were retail, and we were seeing a ton of crime. I mean, a ton of fake IDs. But this is a real person walking in. This isn't a person that's afraid to show their face. They're walking in, but they're walking in with a fake ID. So they're, basically you can't prosecute them. But now what we're seeing is dramatic increases. So in our call center, I don't have the numbers here. Oh, you do. Thank you. So it's almost 7%. And it's not surprising. If you think about call centers, you're calling in and you're faceless. And you're talking to a human on the other line. And that human is super vulnerable to social engineering. People want to help. And if you get the right sense of urgency and the right motivation behind that call center agent, you're going to get the keys to the kingdom. There are people that are masters at this. So it's no real surprise that call center is the number one attack channel. And it's no real surprise that digital, again, it is faceless. We don't have any idea who that person is in most cases, but there's a lot more tools applied in the digital channel to detect fraudulent stuff for IP addresses and things like that the call center agent just doesn't have access to. But I mean, we're still seeing a pretty good number happening in retail, 1.9%. And when you start thinking about the numbers, I ran it earlier, it's billions and billions of dollars that are going. And that's just our view of the world, not everybody else's.
And just adding to that, even you mentioned people, I guess it's unsurprising that the call center transactions is also high, given what you're mentioning about, people calling in and, probably more of those like account recovery calls and, account takeover risks that are probably occurring, as well in terms of these channels for individuals.
Yeah, people are getting very, very frustrated with their inability, especially victims, their inability to prove they are who they say they are. And that's just a terrible rub because, like, as you said, Blair, we want to detect the fraud and we need to do better. That's a very, high fraud rate for that channel. At the same time, you've got victims who've already are dealing with an issue and they're just trying to clean up the mess. So figuring out where's that balance, I think that's the eternal question. That's what we have to solve for.
Yeah, and the taste that leaves in your mouth. I remember the first time that I failed a knowledge-based authentication check. It was with the Google Wallet. So I'm dating myself a little bit. I don't think that we've even heard about the Google Wallet for a number of years, but I couldn't pass either. I mean, they asked me all these knowledge-based authentication questions. I answered to the best of my ability, failed 3 times in a row, but left that taste in my mouth like I am who I say I am. I'm not trying to commit fraud here. I'm just trying to sign up for a legitimate service and you won't let me. I will never do business with you again. I'm done. I would never, ever, ever consider doing the Google Wallet again. So people need to think about that balance because that reaction that I had is not
That is
indifferent from
not
the.
uncommon. Not uncommon at all, especially when they've already been victimized. You had a bad outcome and something that wasn't pleasant, and the victims are going, "Is this my thief again? What's happening?" It adds this extra layer of anxiety and tension, and they don't know why. Why is this happening? Not just I made a mistake or I couldn't pass this. It's like, oh my God, my thief is back, and they're doing it to me again.
Oh,
There's a lot of swirling around during those transactions when people are trying to prove they are who they say they are if they've been a previous victim.
sounds like 20 more therapist sessions to me.
And building on that, in terms of everything we've discussed today and in terms of what's going on with fraud and its evolution. And first I want to draw folks' attention to take the second poll, in terms of which tactic does your business really rely upon to fight fraud at your organization. And then I want to talk to you both about, for the people in the audience today, combating the fraud we've been discussing. What is important for businesses to know and do in 2025 in terms of, how they can fight fraud, what they should be doing, and those best practices to also, Blair, as you mentioned, striking that balance between security and user experience.
It is tough. I'll relay an experience I had this morning, which just makes me scratch my head. I am trying to get out of the cold weather in Atlanta for the next few months and renting a place in Florida. They go through this background check and identity verification, but the extent of the identity verification was having me take a picture of the front of my ID. That process took 90 seconds. I failed it 4 times. Don't know why, but I'm certain that it went to a human. And being in the industry, I took a very high quality picture with all 4 corners, very well focused, that kind of thing. But to think that anybody on the other end of that website had any ability to look at a picture of just the front of my ID and know whether that was real or not, you are setting yourself up to be really, really, really a victim of identity fraud. It won't work. I don't want to brag, but I've been doing this for quite a while. I'm considered one of the best experts in the world. I would never consider myself good at doing this at the other end of a transaction like that. Maybe I'd get 50%, and they'd have to be a pretty poor quality fake these days for me to detect. But what we see today, they're just too good. They look exactly when you're looking at a picture. If I could touch and feel and hold it with the tactical features and know what the flexibility of that plastic is and that kind of thing, that's a little bit different. But just seeing a picture of an identity document, there's no way that without really strong technology in place, you have any ability to combat any of these vulnerabilities that we've talked about today.
And, Eva, I also wanted you to to talk a little bit more, about that balance in terms of for the individual, right? If you're somebody in Blair's position that's having a really terrible time with somebody's workflow, or just folks who have been the victims of identity fraud before and how that impacts their ability, to go through these systems, what do businesses need to know about that?
Oh, there's a lot. And I think the first thing is just understanding that these are your customers. They're going to have these problems, and having an off ramp for them is really important. I know that we're talking
Mm.
about technology and how we can fight fraud and how we can leverage these tools. And that is extremely important. But when that fails, having a non-digital off ramp for your customers, I think that is absolutely key. And businesses can make that choice. We've kind of talked both businesses and government, and it's so very, very different. Government can't choose their customers. You must have an off ramp for
Mhm.
if you're a government agency, because anybody needs to be able to access your services. Businesses can make some choices about that, but I would truly recommend making that available, making it easy for people to understand. And frankly, we talk a lot about employee training, and let's train employees on all of these different aspects, and that's great. But I also always say train your customers. Train your customers about how you're going to expect them to interact with you, with your platform, with your technology, what you will and will not ask them. Again, as someone who does a lot of consumer education, I tend to see the world through that lens, but I think there's a place for that in just about all of these solutions. Well timed, good training and education. I think that's going to help. It certainly can't hurt. Certainly can't make the problem worse.
It's an awesome answer, and I love the concept of off ramp. That's something that's just kind of popped up in the past few years in our work with government entities, and I think we've come up with some pretty good solutions there. It doesn't all have to be digital. Sometimes the off ramp solutions can be give you even a stronger sense of confidence. So
Mhm, mhm.
So one last topic, just as we, have a few more minutes that I wanted to go through here, is digital identity, also evolving as part of these fraud trends and technology. And, we're seeing the evolution and shifts to, verifiable credentials, MDLs in the United States. And some of these are continuing to gain steam, right? So both individuals and businesses are looking for a way to prove and verify identities that's secure and that's streamlined. Blair, where does the technology stand right now for that in terms of, how governments, business can, view digital identity versus physical documentations, and where might we expect that to go in 2025?
it's far superior. There are some gaps here. So with digital identities, you are validating that identity directly with the issuer. So it's not somebody that's using computer vision and and a bunch of algorithms to physically examine a physical document. All that has to happen here is to verify the cryptography. So we're verifying that this is really California that issued this public key, and that this is really a private key within the range that California could have issued to the consumer. So it's simply a verification of cryptography, which with PKI, if you manipulate it, that certificate breaks. So it's really, really tough to fake. You would have to be able to walk into the California DMV with some sort of fake birth certificate, because they're validating birth certificates, some sort of a real social security card, not just a number, because they're validating those direct with SSN, some sort of a real um, proof of residence, which in a lot of cases are validating, but not in all. But nevertheless, you'd really have to have a legitimately issued identity document from the state presented. The problem is that today nobody has any way to look at that document on your phone and know if it's real or not.
Mhm.
So adoption has been really, really awful so far. In the states that we've put these out, I think Arizona might have been the first state to issue MDLs. Eric, he's the head of the DMV there. Don't get mad at me if I'm wrong on this, but I think adoption is somewhere right around 2% of the state's population. And the reason why is very simple. I mean, everybody would love to not have to carry a wallet and just carry their phone, what they carry with them every day. The problem is it can't be accepted anywhere. The only way that you can use that Arizona ID is at Sky Harbor Airport in Phoenix and maybe a couple of other airports around the country. Once the utility expands on these digital IDs, you're going to see it explode. There's already, over half the states that have signed up for issuing digital IDs. That will explode. But once the utility explodes, and a couple of our big customers are really looking forward to accepting these. Historically, we've been looking at these things in the past just visually. And the challenge with that is it's very, very simple to jailbreak. You could create a Georgia digital ID on my device, but if I won't tell everybody on how to beat this, but I could beat it. I could change the data on that digital ID and present it visually, and nobody would be able to tell. So you've got to be able to compare the cryptographic keys. That takes special hardware. Where we are today is where you started this question. 863-5 is what has passed so far. And that allows for the physical presentation of a digital identity document. What that means is you have to have your phone and you have to tap it on a device, much like you do with Apple Pay. 863-7 has been ratified. It's just not fully supported in all of the browsers today. But what that'll open up is your ability to do this remotely over the web. So I can enter my credentials into a web application by scanning a QR code, and all that cryptographic validation can happen remotely. That also is going to open up the utility of these things, and we'll see them explode. But I think we're a little ways away, unfortunately.
And pairing with that is also how consumers feel about that. Even, do you have any thoughts in terms of how people, we have some stats on the screen about people who have already adopted one or would if it was available, but, what can you say about those sentiments?
High level, I do think it's going to shift and people will adopt it. I agree with you, Blair. Yes, I'm one of those people. I have this really cool app on my phone that I can do nothing with. Because it's not accepted anywhere. So when it is and the utility becomes greater, I do think people will adopt it when they see the convenience and when they are assured of privacy and security. I think the biggest challenge that we're going to have, and kind of what I hear from individuals, and I talk to people, I do presentations, I talk to the public all the time, is we get a little bit lost. Like the conversation we just had, Blair, that would make most people's eyes glaze over. They would not know what you're talking about with cryptography. They're like, I don't know what rules now you're talking about numbers. What's happening? They want to know, is this a privacy issue for me? And is it safe? And then what can I do with it? And the biggest pushback that I get on mobile driver's license, digital ID, the use of biometrics, kind of all in one, is people go, I don't want the government to have my biometrics. That is the knee-jerk reaction. And when I start asking questions and just say, well, do you have a driver's license? Do you have a physical driver's license? Do you have a passport? And explain to them, look, the government already has your biometrics. They have your picture, and that's all we're talking about. And we're talking about consent-based. Would you want to use it to do something much more quickly? Then people get on board. But if we talk over them and start talking in technical terms that they don't understand, or say, well, just trust me, it's better, or laugh at people, we're not going to get that adoption. Or it's going to come, much more slow. Like people are they'll go kicking and screaming. Well, I'll come along because now this is the only way I can do it, but I didn't want to. So I think we've got to see those two things converge. Let's really explain to people the safety, the efficacy, and the benefit. And let's also create some benefits so that I can actually use this app somewhere in the next 5 years.
I'll never say 863-5 again.
No, us. We just have to remember, that's one of the things that we always say, know your audience. Who am I talking to?
Agree. Good point. And just to emphasize what you just said, the safety and security and privacy of digital IDs far exceeds what happens with physical identity document. You've got selective disclosure. I mean, if you're going to buy liquor, all that person needs to see is your face to know it's you and that you're above 18. They don't need to know your address. They don't need to know your date of birth. They don't need to know any of the other attributes on there. So these things are very privacy preserving and give you much more control over your data.
And when you give someone a specific example that they can relate to and that they can see the benefit, that's when the light bulb goes off. If I'm talking to young college-aged women, talking about that benefit, when you're going to the club or to the bar, the bouncer isn't going to see your address. They don't know where you live. They're not going to see all that other data. They're just going to get a yes, no. They go, okay, that sounds great. So when we make the case for how this is safer than physical IDs and point to specific examples, that's when I think you change people's perception and attitudes.
Solid.
Great. Well, I think that's about all the time we have. So unless two of you have anything else to add, thank you so much for your time. Thanks to our audience. As I mentioned at the top of the hour, we'll be sure to send out a recording of this webinar. And once we have it finalized, ready to go, a fraud report is on the way, so you can get all of these insights and more that we discussed, because there is so much happening. So again, Blair, Eva, thank you so much for joining us. It's been great. Thanks.
It was a pleasure. Thanks.
Thanks, both of you.